Good afternoon. It is October 31st, 2024. Firstly, thank you to the people of the Norman Finkelstein group, Facebook group that I'm live streaming to at this moment, for having the courage of your convictions to stand up for the bare minimum of humanity, standing up in defiance of U.S. and Israeli fascism. And there's a study that came out this week suggesting that 75 to 80% of all of the funding of Israeli war crimes from roughly 1948 to the present, particularly 500,000 people in the Levant who have died in the last year because of ostensibly Israeli war crimes, right? But all of the money, 75% of the money for all of this, and one should, I think, then assume a comparable level of steering by the U.S. fascist empire of Israel to be occurring from the first. There is no Israeli fascism without U.S. fascism. There is no understanding of this problem without you will better understanding of a functioning of geopolitics by thinking of Israel not as a country, but as an overgrown U.S. military base. It's true there's a lot of people living there, the kinds of people who will tend to riot and, quote, protest because they want to be sure that their fascist friends in the Israeli offensive forces are able to rape male prisoners, the hostages, the real hostages, right? Many thousands and thousands of Palestinians held without trial for much of their lives. These are the real hostages. This is it's not useful to think of Israel as a country. It shouldn't be a country. It's not useful to think of it as a country. It's an outpost of U.S. fascism for in all of these things that matter. But I called this 1400 Days of Depravity more of an allusion to the U.S. Election cycle, which is coming to a conclusion with next week's 2024 presidential election. And so I'm encountering people in social media and elsewhere making what would seem to be sensible statements about things like white supremacy, saying all sorts of sharing all sorts of quotes and observations about the problematic nature of U.S. White supremacy. But these are overwhelmingly people who are not fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system, who are not trying to stop the U.S. Socially murderous domestic policies, which by and large look at things like a country having a national health service, a public health service or not. Many countries, quite nearly as evil as the fascist United States, do have a public health service. The difference there is that the United States has, throughout its history, had this mandate to murder new Africans and other people of color, and this is now done through social murder. So these people who are ostensibly very concerned with white supremacy, particularly the person of Donald Trump becoming president, a person who was president before and who was not objectively significantly worse than other U.S. white supremacist presidents like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris would be, who all of these people have done incredibly bad things, and Trump has done among the worst things, particularly for the environment. It's preposterous It's utterly preposterous that as a species, we are 4 years away, 4.5 years away, according to every credible climate scientist, from runaway overheating caused by U.S. enforced capitalist climate apocalypse. Um, and the most notorious climate denier, perhaps in history, is about to be elected to be president of the United States again. This country, which is most responsible for creating and exporting, basically forcing the system, the omnicidal U.S. capitalistic system, on the rest of the world. Um, this is very likely to lead to relatively near-term human extinction. You're not going to turn into a pumpkin on January 1st, 2029, but after 2029 or thereabouts, these effects will be irreversible. We will have reached a point where we are basically converting, for all intents and purposes, in all the ways that matter, planet Earth into something that will more resemble the planet Venus. Um, this is well in evidence by the change in this world from 2015, when we reached 1 degree of overheating, today where we may have already breached permanently 3 degrees of overheating, and so many millions more people being displaced or dying as a result of capitalism's climate apocalypse. So in less than 10 years, we've gone from the point where we say this is problematic, 1 degree of overheating, to every climate scientist at 3 degrees of overheating saying, um, bend over and kiss your ass goodbye. And so what happens 8 years from now? Um, in 2024, according to one study, which may have been slightly problematic, but nevertheless, according to one study, no CO2 in the aggregate was converted to O2 by these um, uh, flora systems of the different kinds, trees and oceans primarily. Um, so, um, again, converting planet Earth to planet Venus, that is what capitalists are doing. Um, we have to end capitalism before 2029 if humanity is to survive. And I think of, unfortunately, this massacre of people in Levant, these other more or less wholly U.S. orchestrated proxy wars on the African continent, between Russia and Ukraine. These are distractions, very successful and horrible distractions. You should not diminish the mass murder of people, but by and large, these are distractions so that the United States power structure can be in a position to have a climate denier be the president, where without such distractions, people would be tending to be talking about capitalism's climate apocalypse now to stop it. Instead, the opposite is done. The people least suited to doing this are allowed to continue to dominate world affairs. Um, there is no more reprehensible thing in human history than the U.S. fascist, and that's across the board. That's a statement not just about Joseph Biden or Donald Trump or Koch, Charles Koch type people, outsized fascistic power players. That's a statement about the European descended majority, the 70% of European descended people who continue to uphold the system, who continue to partake of the consumerist products that are the driving force behind all of this to such a high degree, and continue to allow fascistic institutions and for-profit institutions to exist. If there were any good people of this kind in any number among the European descended fascist pig, if there were any number of people who would not be described as a European descended fascist pig, there would be some hundreds of thousands or millions of people permanently bivouacked outside of the Pentagon or the White House of the United States, the white man's house, demanding an end to the omnicide, irrespective of whether there are other things which should correctly be protested or fought against, such as the Gaza genocide. And I was going to post this to a group called the Blob, but I guess you're not able to live stream directly there. Um, because I wanted to focus more generally on the problems of the military-industrial complex abomination, $1 trillion-a-year horror, which is the world's worst polluter. The United States military expenditures are the world's worst polluter, worse than the worst of corporations, Shell, ExxonMobil, all of those. Um, but it's far worse than that, because their only real job on the world stage, aside from murdering people, like orchestrating the murder of many hundreds of thousands of dead in the Ukraine, Russia, the Levant, and elsewheres, just in the last months, their only real job on the world stage is protecting super polluters, enforcing an inescapable regime of global super pollution that is the driver of the omnicide, of which I spoke. And I am a scientific communist, which is to say that I believe that human beings should organize and fight for a humane and sustainable economic system in defiance of such omnicidal and fascistic institutions, if they could be so called. And it's not a that shouldn't be a complicated thing, or a thing which causes you to draw back, to be taken aback, because the fight for a humane and sustainable economic system should be the simplest and most intuitive of things that anyone would do. And it's only because of a tremendous amount of bourgeois ideology and perhaps a capacity in human beings for kind of intellectual laziness and general torpor of that kind, to not be. Well, it's correct to say that this omnicide is the magnitude of concern that will tend to push people out of that ennui, out of that frozen state where they are not willing to fight even for their own survival. It takes things like that for people to become revolutionaries. And sometimes these things can happen, as Comrade Lenin said, a year happening in the course of a week, things along these lines. These things, when they happen, they will happen quite quickly. That's why I would say it's not so unusual to imagine, even between now and U.S. Election Day, that someone like Jill Stein could become the next president, because we live in this, certainly live in such uncertain times. But I would argue that even Jill Stein, who is fairly legitimately anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, even she would not do what Ben-Zion, 2024, America's last president, myself, would do on day one if elected president, which is sign an executive order that I've written disbanding the United States federal government and removing all pertinent holdings therein, not the military-industrial complex to be wholly disbanded, but moving all pertinent holdings therein to the oversight of existing semi-autonomous Native American governing bodies, which would necessarily become autonomous and further built out to that end. This is the only play. This is the only play for stopping the omnicide, is dismantling the United States military-industrial complex. So let's imagine that Jill Stein, some freakish thing happens, um, um, uh, Donald Trump dies of COVID the next 3 days, and and nobody really likes Kamala Harris, so Jill Stein becomes the next president. The What happens? 2029 rolls around. Jill Stein's been president for a few years. The military-industrial complex is still humming away at its omnicidal operations. Now we've reached runaway overheating. So even the Social Democrat is really constitutionally incapable, by their nature, that is, of um, of doing this thing, of building a humane and sustainable economic system. Only the scientific communist, only the person who actually is willing to fight, take up arms, and organize to that end, to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system. Only they will be able to do this thing. And there's a lot of talk right now about one Democrat, one high-profile Democrat who are just fascists, will say in one breath that Donald Trump is a fascist, and then their husband or wife or a friend will say, but we are going to work with these fascists. We're going to put them in our cabinet where they're our friends, of course. That's not what a person who actually believes someone is a fascist would say. All of these people are far right. They're just putting on a dog and pony show. The Hillary Clinton campaign of 2016 employed a Pied Piper strategy where she more or less installed her longtime friend Donald Trump, not her adversary. There's a lot of pictures of them like hanging out together and having drinks as president, because all of these people are far right neoliberal capitalists. It doesn't matter very much to them who is president, as long as this omnicidal regime is maintained. That's the only way that you would explain that kind of behavior, just as the only real way to understand what the abomination of the State of Israel is to understand it as an extension of the U.S. empire. If you start from at any point in your life, from this more liberalistic or self-deceived um, fundamental, from a bad premise, no matter what you're doing in the world, if you're starting from a place of self-deception, you are handicapping yourself, and you shall not find scarcely but 1 in 1,000 United people in the United States who is not doing this in every day, in every way, self-deceived, tremendously self-deceived. So you have 1,400 days of depravity. That's to say, almost all of the days of any given election cycle, presidential election cycle, where people are upholding fascism, upholding inhumane economic systems, upholding unsustainable foreign and domestic policies. And it's important to emphasize that the domestic policies, as bad as they are, really the blob, the $1 trillion a year abomination of the military-industrial complex, is the most problematic thing there. Without this thing, we would have already reached a humane and sustainable economic system in much of the world, instead of the United States outright murdering 300 million people, as described in the book Endless Holocausts, by and large, in wars and genocidal actions, anti-communist wars and wars of theft. 300 million people have been murdered by the United States. The Soviet Union, for example, might still exist instead of a more precarious state like Russia. And you could say this about every land. India would not be a far-right country. It would probably be a scientific socialist country. Japan would be a scientific socialist country. Even the Eurocentric paradigm itself, the European continent, so-called, would be scientific socialist without the malign influence of the fascist United States. over the course of the last century. Um, it's easy, perhaps, to overstate the U.S. power in all of this. The Eurocentric paradigm is really another way of looking at this, aside from just the United States military-industrial complex. But I don't think it's generally overstated. I don't think I've overstated it here. The United States is by far history's most successful fascist nation. Um, and that's in evidence by these 300 million murders to destabilize every corner of the world. So to allow for the extraction of capital, there's no racism inherent to this. The racism is a byproduct of the operations of empire and financial capital, which are one and the same. Um, and the liberal doesn't recognize that they are one and the same. They will make some statements about the need for humane domestic policies, which will not be achieved as long as there is this $1 trillion a year military industrial complex. The absence of those humane domestic policies and the existence of that bottomless pit of the military industrial abomination, those are the same thing. Money is not being spent on taking care of people because it's spent on endless wars. Um, and so you have someone like Bernie Sanders, a trickster, tricking tens of millions of people to some degree or other in the United States into back into the Democratic fold, back into the far right neoliberal fold, making them compliant with this omnicidal force, the $1 trillion a year abomination of the military-industrial complex. And of course, this person is not. This person is in favor. He says, "Oh, it's a tragedy to see 300,000 people in Palestine die. It's a tragedy." But anybody who then says "but" to that, but Israel. What about Israel? This person not a socialist, right? This person has more in common with Mussolini than with any real socialist. Um, as you would say of any high-profile personality from the United States who would tend to be described as a socialist. Um, Most notably, their person that Sanders would often reference, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt has stopped a real people's government from being built, a real humane and sustainable economic system from being built by applying some of the features, not all, even by the standards of the 1930s and 40s, some of the features of social democracy. And that's what Mussolini did when he came to power. This is somebody who has more in common with a fascist than with a real human being, and that would be said of quite literally every European descended person in the United States, and for the most part, overwhelmingly in this world as a whole. Um, it's one in 1,000. It's one in 1,000 who should not just face the wall. um, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and I hope it doesn't sound like blaming the victim to come to a group like this so focused on ending endless genocidal actions, war crimes, and horrors in the Levant, particularly in Palestine, um, to then say this thing that this is really a feature of a kind of sleight of hand on the part of the fossil fascist. I read this book recently called Fossil Fascism. I'll share a link to an audiobook for that in the description here. But this Donald Trump is the perhaps archetypal fossil fascist, and he's very likely about to become president again. And all of this mass murder is in service to seeing that outcome. All of that is in service to maintaining this blob, even, you know, even the thing that could build this into something sustainable, say, halving U.S. military expenditures, and the U.S. becoming a relatively isolationist in those respects, and the U.S. Doing things like complying with the Paris Accords and other things along these lines, reformist measures that could be applied, let's say, January of 2025 with the next presidency. Even those things are unacceptable. Even the basic, the baseline thing of building a sustainable world, even those things are unacceptable to the U.S. fascist power player and to the generally to the European descended fascist pig who uphold this system, who are not overwhelmingly responsible for it individually, but who are nevertheless, as a group, overwhelmingly responsible for all of this. The kind of people who say, I don't like Donald Trump, and they vote for Donald Trump. Or they say, I don't like genocide, then they vote for Kamala Harris. The American is no creature on earth, perhaps no living thing on earth, perhaps other than a potted plant, is stupid than a fucking American. These are the stupidest fucking creatures alive. Stupider than an amoeba, the American. Um, you wouldn't. This is a reasonable definition of intelligence, in my view, to say that an intelligent creature will take steps to preserve its continued existence. If it does not do that, it's not a viable creature. And this is a human being, but that's not the human being, right? People in Palestine, people in Somalia, people across the steppes of Asia, people in South America and elsewheres, they are not enforcing a system that's killing the planet. The European descended American fascist pig is enforcing the system that's killing the planet. And that's an important distinction because people are very quick in this book, Fossil Fascism. It's basically about the European descended fascist pig generally blaming the victim for its crimes. And it describes this sort of thing at great length, describing a revival of a neo-fascist governance across the European world, uh, the North Atlantic powers and such. Um, uh, uh, well, I want to change gears a little bit because I always try to talk about maybe something a little more positive as well, which is what do we do in this 4.5 years before we reach runaway overheating to stop this otherwise more or less inevitable outcome of the death of billions, not all of humankind. And if you say, oh, Ben, I don't think everyone's going to die, you are, for one thing, extremely unlikely to be one of those lucky people who doesn't die in the course of this collapse of the ecosystem that could well be occurring in the 2030s. The total collapse, not the thing that we're seeing now, it's displacement of people in the global south, but a more thoroughgoing collapse. But irrespective of that, if you say, I don't think everyone's going to die, you are saying just about the most racist thing that anyone has ever said, right? Because you're still driving around in your SUV eating cheeseburgers, not even changing your lifestyle, much less organizing or demanding the dismantling of these omnicidal forces, these industrial sectors that are problematic there, um, and and so people are paying. These people who have virtually no climate footprint historically or today are paying for your sins, and then you have the audacity to say, I don't think everyone's going to die, when you are basically the murderer of those billions who will die for your sins. There is, and will you find European descended people who have this analysis? Will you define them in any number? No. Again, if there were such people in any number, you wouldn't see this resurgence, this growth of neo-fascism in Europe of the last 15 years, you would not see. We would have already abolished fossil fuel products of different kinds, uh, almost wholly, except in those places where it causes supply chain collapse um, in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. Um, but rather, um, what you have are just demons, right? You have European demons. That's when you see a light-skinned person. That's what you should imagine: a demon in human skin, in my view, because you're not getting, no one's getting through to any of these people. These people who have all of the power, so much of the power in determining world affairs and economic affairs, are in total denial about what's happening with capitalism's climate apocalypse, the impending omnicide. They're in total denial. So how do we do this thing in these 4.5 years? Well, I could be wrong, but as I said, things sometimes turn on a dime. Sometimes a revolutionary movement emerges and sweeps across the continent in the course of days or weeks or months. This sort of thing could happen outside of what I'm about to propose, and I pray God that it does. But my focus has been on the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history by far, with the thing with more potential than any such thing in the past, which is the development of advanced computing. And by and large, overwhelmingly, advanced computing and advanced technology is captured by these very fascistic forces that we would criticize. But there are possibilities there, a window of opportunity along these lines. There is such a thing called open source software, including open source large language models, which are increasingly seeming rather like human beings. That is to say, they have a more knowledgeable than a human being and able to help human beings with a variety of activities, these chatbots, which is interesting. But they're becoming increasingly agentic, which creates the possibility of collaboration, including mass collaboration, between human beings and these large language model products. And so I would propose an open source large language model work group that's highly automated, which, on the basis of being built to interoperate in the way that I've described, would become a dramatic workforce multiplier for the comrade users who would download that, or um, um, uh, uh, in another there's a model that I've described at some length, wherein individual large language models are downloaded to individual computers with GPUs. But there are other ways to do that that are more cloud-based, in a word. And I'm not going to go into that, but I have made other videos that describe this at some length. Um, and so, if this high automation, human-centered work group were to grow to many thousands, 100,000 or more users, it would become something powerful enough to challenge these institutions by the sheer force of this workforce multiplication, by tasking itself with the building of a humane, sustainable economic system, most particularly in the time frame transforming these industrial bases, like putting pressure on the fascist United States to, say, dramatically reduce the operations of its military-industrial complex, to cease to be this enforcer of this inescapable regime of super pollution as it has been. The only way to get people like this to stop doing this is to stick a gun in their face. Otherwise, what we have is a blob, this permanent military fascist state of this contemporary form that that will continue in spite of the desires of any individual to continue to live, to do this thing of committing mass suicide on behalf of all humankind. European people who make up 9% of the world's population should not be in a position to demand that everyone else die for their creature comforts and their luxury products and their asinine economic system, the capitalist economic system. That should simply not be the case. And I could go into a geopolitical outline of other things that could put that sort of pressure on the fascist United States and its disgusting toadying allies, but I will not. Instead, I will again exhort you, if you have a background in computer science, to reach out to me if you would like some insights or inspiration on the building of this highly agentic LLM, open source LLM work group. This sort of thing doesn't really work if you don't have open source at the center of this. Just as if you try to build some for-profit entity with this same mandate, it would immediately break down. You could point to an analogous operation, an AI safety board that was built a few years ago, which is now OpenAI, a company who is not building a humane and sustainable economic system. They're contributing to the death of the planet, as are other for-profit computing concerns. This corruption must be avoided. We don't have a lot of time to fuck around. We have 4 to 5 years before we've reached runaway overheating, wherein human extinction or near human extinction is a certainty. Maybe you don't like Ben-Zion. Maybe you want to put together a team and work on high automation, open source large language model work group without Ben-Zion. That's great. But just as collectivization is the only path to stopping this kind of fascistic force historically, this is true today, and we must build this thing. And I think that advanced computing is the most credible path to avoiding this extinction level event of capitalism's climate apocalypse in our time.